On this episode of Civic Cocktail, still smarting from your property tax bill?
We ended up, those of us who live in this area, taking a real disproportionate share of the hit.
Is relief on the way?
Our tax system is broken and it's not sustainable.
We need a state income tax.
And no one talks pruning,
You see new growth start, you cut all the old stuff off.
planting, and thatching
That's a great plant.
quite like Ciscoe Morris.
It is so fragrant. I don't know if you folks could see it, but my socks just rolled up and down.
It's all coming up on Civic Cocktail.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Civic Cocktail. I'm Joni Balter here this evening with a group of really smart people ready to talk about property taxes. With us tonight is John Arthur Wilson, the King County Assessor, Seattle City Councilwoman Lisa Herbold, and KVI host John Carlson. Thank you all for being here, really appreciate it. Journalist helping with the questions this evening, Marcus Harrison Green from the South Seattle Emerald, and Jim Bruner from the Seattle Times. We'll start with you, Mr. Assessor. And Valentine's Day. On Valentine's Day, you sent out love notes, shall we say. What did those notes say, and why were they so unusual this year?
Your property tax are growing up. Hugs and kisses, love, John. See you soon. We are required under state law by mid-February. It used to be we were literally required on Valentine's Day to send them out, but we sent out roughly 300,000 notices to half of you that pay your property taxes directly. And for you, it meant an increase anywhere from about 9% if you were in Normandy Park to if you lived in Carnation, just under 32%. Here in the city of Seattle, yes, yeah, I got a lot of that.
You may get a little more.
Countywide, the average was just under 17%. Seattle was about 17%. So I've spent much of the last 2 months traveling around the county, sort of as the digital age Paul Revere going, the taxes are coming, the taxes are coming, the taxes are here. And they're here, folks.
John Carlson, can you tell us how this giant tax increase that folks are experiencing happened in the first place and how it affects Puget Sound communities even more?
Yeah, it started with a lawsuit. A couple of families claiming that the legislature had defined basic education, but then did not adequately fund what they defined as basic education. The state Supreme Court weighs in, and basically three things had to happen. First, they had to toss a lot more money into education. The second thing they had to do was stop relying so much on levies, because levies are supposed to be supplemental, and they had kind of bled over into a lot more than that. And thirdly, they needed to equalize levies. So what they came up with was a series of increases in education, and then last session, a property tax spike of about $1 billion. And
why does it affect Puget Sound communities more?
Because they aimed it, again, at equalizing the property tax burden, and the areas, including me, thanks for the love note, John, made my heart skip a beat, when I opened it, because evaluations are higher, had a lower evaluation, and we ended up, those of us who live in this area, taking a real disproportionate share of the hit.
So for the first time, what the legislature did, historically we've had what's called a budget-based property tax system, where basically if you view your taxes and local government's requirements, the rates float dependent upon how much the government needs. What the legislature did this time is said, no, we're going to pick a specific number, we're going to break it into two parts, in part to do, as John suggested, lower the reliance upon levies. But what that has meant is that in a county like King County, where our property values are significantly higher than the rest of the state, we are paying a significantly larger share of the overall state education funding pool.
So I feel sheepish asking this without Reuven Carlisle here, because he would do this quicker. But who's the GOAT? Why are we sort of picking on Puget Sound communities?
What was the old Willie Sutton quote? You go where the money is. That's where the money is. The fact is property values are significantly higher. I was telling a county assessor across the state a couple years ago about how I had a piece of property in my neighborhood. We live in the Roosevelt neighborhood that went up and sold for $900,000, jumped by $160,000 in just 72 hours. She said the average property in my county is $140,000. So there's a radical disparity between the values in King County and especially here in Seattle and the rest of the state. But what the legislature did in order to close that funding gap is said, good, we're going to leverage that.
Councilmember Herbold, the city plays a role in all of this. How would you describe the city's role in what some folks are calling the property tax bomb?
Sure. I really appreciate the focus on the driver for these property tax increases this year. A lot of people are not aware that the way that the state legislature has dealt with the McCleary decision is so much of a driver. And so it's really helpful, I think, to tell that story. And that's what I've been working to do.
Here comes the chart.
And here comes the chart. And so this is analysis just for Seattle taxpayers. But I think based on what I've heard about the rest of King County, other jurisdictions within King County are probably experiencing something very similar. So this is the McCleary-related driver for the increase. And then here we're looking at the pre-existing school levies. Here we're talking about the Parks District. This is another stream of school district funding, not a levy funding. This sliver is Sound Transit. One would expect Sound Transit, this green sliver right here, to be much larger. And then we've got, this is just the increase in property tax. I also thought, because again, I'm a Seattle legislator, and people really want to know about Seattle's property taxes as compared to other jurisdictions in King County, and looked at other King County jurisdictions, too many to name, a lot of lines, a lot of blue lines, and this red line is Seattle. And so what this means is that Seattle is actually near the bottom of the list of cities in King County for the assessed rate per thousand. In Seattle, the assessed rate per thousand is about 9.5. Does that sound about right? That's what my line says. But the lowest in the county is a place called Hunts Point at 8. And the highest is up here in Auburn.
Little people.
Upwards of $14 per $1,000 in assessed value. And I think whereas we can have conversations about the burden that Seattle taxpayers pay relative to other jurisdictions, this is really useful information when we start talking about our local property tax levies. This is really allows people to think about their contribution compared to other contributions of taxpayers and other municipalities towards running basic government.
So I want to ask John Arthur Wilson and you, Councilmember Herbold, do the city and county, when they're coming up with, hey, you know, we need to have a property tax on something, whatever it is, do you folks call each other up? Do you coordinate? Do you say, we're on the ballot this year asking for this much, or the other entity is on the ballot asking for that much? I mean, is there any coordination? It sometimes feels like nobody calls anybody. Do you know of any communication at that level, either of you?
I know it's happening now with the education levies. We're looking at, we expect the executive to be bringing the council a renewal for the families and ed levy, combining it with the pre-K levy. So these would both be renewals, but the mayor is also interested in funding college with that ballot measure, and we're talking with the school district because they also have they have two levies. They have a capital levy and an operations levy coming up, and we don't want all of these levies to be on the same ballot.
And from your end of things,
historically that hasn't happened. One of the things though that we're trying to do is, and we want to be careful to stay, if you will, in our statutory lane. We don't set taxes. That's what Lisa and other governments do. We do set assessed values. But one of the things that we're working on bringing up, we were trying to bring it up before February, but there were some complications, is what we call a taxpayer transparency tool. So you'll be able to finally go in, see what a ballot measure is on for your local community, look at your specific property and get an idea, an estimate. Now, don't walk to the bank and cut a check for this, but an estimate of how much that would cost you in addition. And that it gets a little tricky because you have to deal with levies that are offsetting existing levies, financing mechanisms, and all that. But we're going to put this up so that finally you get a sense. And then we're making it and going to make it available to local governments so that they have a better idea. What's the dollar and cent impact going to be on their constituents when they propose something? And what's the difference between asking for $50 million and asking for $75 million?
And I just wanted to speak again to the coordination between the school district and the city, and why it's going to be so important this year is because of how the state defines basic education. We're hoping that some of the things that these levies used to pay for are now going to be funded right, with this the state funding. And so in getting that information, we need to make sure that we aren't proposing to pay for things that the school district should pay for. The school district needs to make sure they're not paying for things that the state should be paying for.
Very good. John Carlson.
I love this John Arthur Wilson idea. The big problem that I think we have when people go to the polls and they're asked to vote on something, and I'll give you an example here in just a second, is the language is sometimes so opaque, you don't know what you're really being asked to pay for. So it's hard to gauge what the value is, what the hit is. Perfect example, Sound Transit 3. If you read the ballot title, it's an increase from something like 0.4 to 0.8 of car valuation. And most people say, well, a little increase. But if they had this kind of transparency tool and people knew that they were voting to double or triple their license tabs, then you probably wouldn't have had this kind of rolling rebellion of people opening, you think you were sending out love letters when people went to see what their license tabs were.
Well, they call us about that too.
Well, but John, I have another question for you, and that is, what is wrong with this picture? The city is booming, the county is booming. Why do we need so many new revenues all the time when we're flush like this?
Because I don't think that there is spending restraint in either Olympia or the city of Seattle. Spending in Olympia has gone up 30% in 4 years. Spending in Seattle, according to the Seattle Times, has gone up 40% in 5 years.
So I believe it's 20%. The revenues are up 20% over the last 5 years. And when adjusted for by capita, it's 8%. Well, and so that's just barely above, you have to adjust it for population growth, right?
Population growth, inflation is about 17.
So when you adjust the increased revenues that the city has by capita, it goes from 20% increase in revenues to 8% increase in revenues. And so that really illustrates the adage that the increase in revenues does not keep up with the increase in cost to provide services. And for me, the question isn't about whether or not government is collecting too much taxes. It's who we're charging to pay for taxes. We have the most regressive taxation system in the nation. Of all 50 states, we are the most regressive. We also are the 9th least transparent. Because we rely on a property tax and sales tax so much, we don't know how much we're paying. So thank you for that bill.
So,
by the way, just to point out, the Seattle Times a couple of months ago, in the last 5 years, spending has increased in Seattle almost 40%. Revenues have climbed about 35%. And you have to, in a city that is doing as well as Seattle, do you see the kind of built-in spending discipline? And you look at numbers like the workforce. Almost half the employee workforce in Seattle now earns 6 figures. almost half, 100,000 or more. The median income in Seattle is about 80. So have they built in spending levels that just from year to year, just continuing doing what they're doing, are guaranteeing that the city will soon outspend available revenues?
Marcus Harrison Green.
Thank you. This question is for Councilmember Herbold. Councilmember, do you feel, in your assessment, how do you feel we can better structure our tax system so that it isn't, these changes aren't, so myopic at times? Do you think that we should have something where an increase in property taxes are offset somehow by a decrease in sales taxes, for instance? There was a great editorial that hit this afternoon, co-authored by County Assessor Arthur Wilson and King County Executive Dow Constantine. One of the things that they're proposing is legislation that would allow folks who are low income to be exempt from some of the voter-approved property tax levies. I think that's a great way to help address that problem. But I think at the nub of the problem is the fact that we don't have the right mix of options that we can use. We need a state income tax. We need an employee hours tax. We need to make sure that the folks that are earning a lot of income in this city are doing more to contribute and paying their fair share. And I think that there's a lot of work to be done both on the city, county, and state levels to try to turn our broken tax structure up, right side up. It's upside down right now.
We need to be honest with each other and with you. Our tax system is broken and it's not sustainable. And we fundamentally need to modernize it. Lisa and I have talked about some of the things. Like one of the things we're looking at is, could you implement countywide, statewide actually, a homestead exemption that would give everybody some break on their property taxes? You somehow cap it or calibrate it so that Bill Gates isn't getting 10% off on his house in Medina, but maybe that couple that lives in Columbia City is getting 10% off on their property taxes. But it means we've got to have a serious discussion across the state of how do we rebalance our property tax system? How do we rebalance our overall revenue system? And to John's point also, though, to look at how do we make government more efficient? We have 163 taxing districts in King County, more than 600 specific levy codes. My friends, that's ridiculous. And it's not efficient and it's not effective. We can run government much more efficiently. When I was deputy assessor, one of the things we did is we got rid of filing cabinets that held papers that nobody looked at. We saved enough space that we consolidated from one floor to from 2 floors to 1 floor, saved $250,000 a year in capital costs, and allowed the county to save another $3 million in capital expenses. We can do smart things like that. But it requires that we start an honest discussion with one another, and we not get held hostage in that my only solution is you got to raise taxes, or your only solution is you got to cut services. We've got to be smart.
Jim Brunner.
Yeah, John Carlson, the Republican, or the property tax plan, the schools plan that passed in Olympia last year, got more Republican than Democratic votes. The Republicans seem to hew to this idea of using the property tax and not consider things like a capital gains tax. Of course, there are questions about whether the Democrats ever had votes for that too. But do you think the property tax was the right approach to fund the public schools? And is there some kind of conservative case to be made for a more progressive tax system even?
I think the plan that passed was the worst idea going, except for all the others. I've seen people sketching out if we just collect our revenue from this or that source, revenue streams. But your major obstacle to the kind of tax reform that I think Lisa and John Arthur want is the Washington State Constitution. Whether a state income tax or a city income tax or a capital gains tax, which is a tax on income, is desirable or not is a policy argument. But as the city of Seattle found out, the real argument is a legal one. And here is what the state constitution says. It says that the state, all taxes shall be uniform upon the same class of property within the territorial limits of the tax. That's why our sales taxes are uniform, whether you buy, hamburger or Wagyu beef, whether you buy, a pint of ice cream or, a Mercedes. You pay the same rate of tax. And then you can argue about, well, what does property mean? Well, the state constitution in the very next section says the word property, as used herein, shall mean and include everything, whether tangible or intangible, subject to ownership. So my guess is you think that your money is yours. Some people in government don't think that. But if you think that your money is yours, then it can't be subject to a different rate of taxation than anyone else would pay.
I have a question for all of you, and that is to do with the tipping point. When will we reach that moment when folks who are asked to vote for things stop saying yes, where they say, John, when you and I met, you told me a story about you met somebody at a community event, and they said they always vote for every measure all the time, no problem, but they're done, they're finished.
I hear more and more, if you will, classic Seattle liberals who just say, I'm there, I'm not voting, I don't care how noble it is, I'm gone. And I've got to caution us all, because we tend to believe here in town and in King County that it can't happen here. But back in 1997, when Ron Sims was elected county executive to a full term, I was Ron's former chief of staff. I was very excited that night until he pointed to the countywide Medic 1 levy. And he said, dude, you got some work to do, because if you look, that failed. We voted against Medic 1. It can happen again. And that's why we've got to look. And John, I agree with you on the one hand. What we really need to do is take a serious look at reforming and a constitutional amendment to the Uniformity Clause, and recognize that our state is, while one Washington, is actually probably 5 or 6 microeconomies. And that we've got to figure out how we develop tax policy that deals with that and truly make sure everyone pays their fair share.
And Councilmember Herbold, I wanted to ask you this. When you mention property taxes in this city, to a lot of people, their eyes glaze over, especially if they're renters. There's a disconnect of some sort where a lot of renters don't think these property taxes apply to them. Can you explain that? Do you understand that, know about it?
That's a disconnect that I have to admit to not being aware of. I feel like renters are aware that they contribute to property taxes through their rent. They understand that their landlords pass those increases that they pay onto them in the form of increased rents, and that's why, that might be one of the reasons why, or a contributing factor to why we have the highest increase, or the most quickly increasing rents in the nation.
And in fact, from discussions Lisa and I've had, with the transparency tool we've designed, it will also work in a multifamily situation so that, it doesn't take into consideration where your unit is in the building, but it gives you an idea of, for this building, it's $25,000, there are 250 units, so it's going to be on average X. So it'll finally give people that sense, and it gives them an idea of the total stack of what they're paying in property taxes.
Councilmember Herbold, I did want to follow up on the issue of, is it ever enough in Seattle? There doesn't seem to be a lot of historically political pushback or, push for spending restraint by the city. I heard you say that our property taxes are low, and that maybe implying that there's room to grow. And I've heard, that there's a task force that the city council appointed that came back and said, we should have a head tax on businesses to help pay for homeless services, housing, and they chose the highest end of that possible tax, $75 million. And one of the co-chairs I heard on the radio say that's just a down payment. So do you take that into account, that maybe there is a need for the city council and state and city government to show that you're spending that money wisely?
Absolutely. My point is less of the demonstration with the chart is less to suggest that our property taxes are low, but to create some perspective as it relates to what other jurisdictions around us are paying. I am concerned about continually finding new things to use the property tax for. I think we need to stick to renewals of current things that we fund, and only adding on new things when we reduce the property tax funding for other things. So, and that's going to be part of what I'm looking at when we get into the deliberations on the families and ed levy.
John Carlson, you were laughing a bit.
Well, no, the down payment is what did it. We're about the down payment. My question is, who is the budget hawk in Seattle city government? Who's the conservative who's saying, okay, now, are we really looking at what the ROI is on this, and can we streamline? Do we really need to increase the number of executives 40% in 5 years? I don't know where to find a budget hawk in Seattle city government.
As part of the utility rate strategic plan, I have asked, as it relates specifically to Seattle Public Utilities, which is a department that I have oversight on, I've asked the question why we have more executive, like a different span of control that is considered a best practice. So we have more executives managing fewer numbers of line employees, and so I've asked for SPU to get back to us about, because there's actually a standard, and this was identified in a state audit several years ago on our utilities. We also have built into many of the programs that we fund in different departments a requirement to show outcomes associated with the funding.
Well, first of all, the utilities, I think, are run on ratepayers. Okay, they supply the funding for that. In terms of general government, you brought up something very telling. You said that several of the programs that we have in Seattle city government now have to show outcomes. They have to show metrics. They have to show return on the investment for the money, the grant money, the budget they're getting. When it comes to Seattle's homeless program, its homeless strategy, they just started doing that about a year ago. And the so-called, effort to end homelessness in Seattle started with an unprecedented amount of spending and investment in a whole myriad number of programs and approaches, started in 2005. And for year after year after year, apparently didn't occur to anyone to say, shouldn't we be asking these organizations who are getting all this grant money to show some results? I mean, that's just, whether you're on the right, left, red state, blue state, Democrat, Republican, Democrat, or conservative, liberal, that's just common sense auditing, getting what you pay for.
It's really important to make a distinction between what we are newly doing now, which is requiring programs to determine outcomes that are designed before we award funding, from what we have always done. Because the way John describes it sounds like they don't even have to report on their funding.
I have to cut it right there. This conversation went too quickly.
They always have contract requirements to fulfill.
We're out of time. We have been discussing crazy high property tax bills with King County Assessor John Arthur Wilson, Seattle City Councilmember Lisa Herbold, and KVI radio host John Carlson. We'll be back shortly with Ciscoe Morris, Seattle's best known gardener. We go from the weeds to the garden. And Civic Cocktail is back. Joining us now is Ciscoe Morris, gardener extraordinaire. Ciscoe, you appear on TV, radio, print. You pretty much have this gardening beat down. Why is the Pacific Northwest the best gardening region in the world?
Well, it's interesting. It's our climate. We can grow more kind of plants here in the Puget Sound area than almost anywhere else in the world. There's a few places in Japan and England that can grow as many plants. We don't get too hot and we don't get too cold. And so we have a wide variety. Maybe we can't plant some of those tropical plants, but we can grow all kinds of incredible plants that no one else can grow. So we're really lucky to live here.
Lots of plants. How did you get started in this business as a gardener?
Well,
How did it happen?
I used to garden with my grandma and my mom. And Ciscoe is my nickname, by the way.
Oh, what's your real name?
Yeah, my real name is Jim, and gardening with Jimmy just wouldn't have made it. But I love the Ciscoe Kid TV show. Not everybody knows that show. If you're young, you don't know that one, but it was a great show. And I gardened in a sombrero, and everybody called me Ciscoe. So since I've been knee-high to the kitchen table, everybody called me Ciscoe. Well, one day, on the telephone poles in front of the house, they put up signs looking for an assistant gardener at this church down the street. So I went in and told my mom and my grandma.
You were 10 years old, right?
I was 10 years old.
Right.
I said, I'm going to get this job. They were not looking for a 10-year-old kid. So I come swaggering in my sombrero trying to get this job. Well, the 5th time I went in and harassed the priest in charge of hiring, it's the first time I ever heard a priest swear. He's like, you little blankety blank, get out of here. You have the job. Don't ever come in this office again.
But then he relented.
He relented, and when I came in and told the head gardener I was his new gardener, it's the first time I saw a grown man cry.
So when you and I met before the show, I said, so what's so great about all this gardening? Why do you like to be outside so much? And you mentioned hummingbirds. Oh. What's up with hummingbirds?
Well, you know, it is so fun to get to know all the wildlife in your garden, and I love birds with a passion, and I have them all named, but hummingbirds are by far the most fun. They're chasing each other around, they're doing their thing. Today, while I was out in the garden, and Anna's hummingbird, they're the big green one that stays year-round, it came right up to me, and its whole head was so bright red, you couldn't believe it. Red courgette, it was like scary, you know? It's like,
did you grab it? No.
I wanted to grab it, but you know, and they know me so well, they come right up to me. So anything you could do to attract hummingbirds, that makes gardening so much more fun.
So recently, comedian John Oliver did a very funny piece on you. It was called, "You Wish You Loved Anything as Much as Seattle gardening expert Ciscoe Morris Loves Everything."
This is the ugliest plant in the world, but I love it. I love chimes. I've used one of these for a banister on my porch. Oh, Regan, I'm so excited. Look, the rhubarb is starting to bud. It's so cute. Rhubarb garden. I just saw rhubarb budding up in my garden, and I love the living tweedle out of that stuff. I'm going to harvest the living beetle hopper out of you.
So pretty. It does smell good.
So flavorful. Oh la la. 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 Oh, I love doing this. Oh, can I do this for the next half hour? Look at that one.
So, what did the John Oliver piece do to your life? Did you know it was being done? Were you part of it, or how did this happen?
It's really fun. I knew nothing. Absolutely nothing about this. And so I get gazillions of emails from everywhere. So my wife Mary sometimes gets in there and just gets the junk out before I look at it. She kind of went, holy cats! So, you know, we had emails from Sweden in there. People had seen this.
Was this like the same day that this happened?
Same morning. Yeah. It happened Sunday, and it was Monday morning when I went on the web. And so one of my friends sent me a link to it. So I looked at the link, and I was, holy cats, where did that come from? To this day, I don't know where they got it, how they got it.
You have a fan club. Somebody's a secret promoter of your
really
career.
Really wonderful, and holy cats, I had a lot. I'm giving a talk in Kalamazoo, Michigan in a couple weeks because of it.
So it's
I've been up to Alaska. You name it, I've been there. So it's been a big boon for me, and it was really fun. And
it was a really funny piece. It was hilarious.
It was a lot of fun. It was thrilling for me to see it.
That was really cool. So you have a couple of key phrases, holy cats, which I hadn't known about. Ooh la la and eat your Brussels sprouts. What? What's going on?
Can I tell the ooh la la story? It takes a little while to tell, but I'll do the short version.
Give us the short version.
So my wife and I, we lead garden tours around the world, and we take trips. We're avid travelers. So this came from when we went to France. So we were in France. We're on a 1,000-mile bike ride. We've got our bikes. We've got our sleeping bags and tents on the bike. And if you've been to France in the last 10 years, you've seen these things, but we had never seen them before. They're outdoor bathrooms. They're big plastic igloo-looking things. So we recognized what it was. We're down in Provence somewhere. We pull over on our bikes, and Mary has to put in 2 francs to go in. Oh. So she puts in 2 francs, and I'm sitting watching our bikes, you know, and she comes out, she's holding the door, and she goes, "You're not gonna believe it in there." She goes, "It's spotlessly clean, and it plays great music," you know. I'm like, oh boy, you know. So I get up and I start looking for 2 francs. She goes, "Why waste 2 francs? The door's open, go use it." I go, "Yeah, why waste 2 francs?" There's one little thing we didn't know about these French toilets.
Oh, cameras?
No, they're self-cleaning. So when the door shuts, it means the person left. It's time to clean. So I walk up to the front. Whoosh! I get blasted right in the chest by these jets. I run to the back. Whoosh! From behind. I run to the door. It's locked. Whoosh! From the side. Whole time Mary's sitting on this bench watching the toilet going. Hearing. Ah! Finally, the jets stop. The door opens, I come staggering out, and here's this little old French guy wearing a beret, holding a baguette, looks at me and goes, "Oh la la."
Oh my
So
God.
that's why I say oh la la, now you know. And I was clean.
You were clean. And the Brussels sprouts?
Well, Brussels sprouts I love because my wife Mary hates them with a passion. And so every
This
couple
is the
I
same
met,
woman who got you into the bathroom?
Yeah. That's right. And everywhere I go, one person in a couple goes, "Oh, I hate those little things." And the other person goes, "Oh, I love them." So I just think it's so fun talking about them because there's just some love-hate thing. And I give you all a hint. If you have a spouse or a partner that hates Brussels sprouts, a really fun thing to do is when they're cooking something special, drop a couple in when they leave. Oh, it adds a lot of excitement in the kitchen.
Marcus Green?
Ciscoe, you seem to always be brimming with so much joy, as you know, case in point. What vitamins are you on, and where can I pick up a bottle?
It's the Brussels sprouts! What can I say?
So I have a... Was that the answer? Okay, good. I have a burning question, and that is, why do millennials like succulents so much? I've noticed this at the stores.
I think the reason millennials love succulents is because they all live in condos or apartments. And so, you know, you can't really grow anything outside. And they're the easiest thing in the world to grow.
Wait, is that a jab at millennials?
No, that's not a jab at all, because if you find something that's really cool looking, is easy to grow, it's worth doing, because I am the biggest succulent lover on earth. I have a collection of them. I must have 90 of them in my garage right now, and they're all under grow lights. But see, the trick to succulents is that you want them to, if they're the succulents that come from cold places, like most cactus do, then you want them to go through a cold winter. And then you fertilize them once in April, and they get the blooms like you've never seen. You see this giant bud come up, and you wait weeks for it to open. You're just like, wow, what is that flower gonna look like? You go to the store, you come back, the whole show is over. The flowers last 4 hours. But they can be big.
What's a decent, high-yield, easy vegetable to grow for someone, say, with the skill level of gardening of a political reporter for a newspaper?
Well, you know, I think, personally, my favorite food on earth is salads. I love salads. I eat them all the time. I never have a night
That's the
I don't
answer
have
to
a salad.
Marcus's question.
Yeah, so I grow a lot of lettuce. You can grow it in a pot this big. And peas, snap peas, oh my gosh, they are so good. I'd start with them. Then broccoli is one of the easiest things to grow on earth. And then, squash. The problem with squash is that you're likely to end up doing a drive-by zucchini on someone. You ring the doorbell, leave 4-footers and run, But all the greens are real easy to grow. They'll take sun or shade, and they're great. And snap peas, you gotta grow.
So in 1 minute, what is the biggest mistake you ever made in your garden?
Okay, well, I made one. I don't think it was that serious, but I put a two-ton rock through the side of my house.
Okay.
But it wasn't
what was
my
that?
fault. They brought a different kind of backhoe than I ever
wait, this
ran.
was an outburst of sorts?
Well, I had actually bragged that I was going to have a new granite dining room table today on my radio show. Little did I know. They brought a John Deere backhoe, and because I was the head gardener at Seattle University, I got to drive a backhoe sometimes, not near buildings. And so I ordered a rental backhoe.
Was that written in, not near buildings?
Yeah, that is true. Well, that was my own rule, actually. But they brought John Deere backhoe instead of a case. Anybody with a brain would have called the place and said, bring the backhoe I ordered, because the controls were the exact opposite. But being the great equipment operator I am, I didn't just put the 2-ton rock through the side of the house. I followed it with the bulldozer. And marriage counseling is getting so expensive.
Well, thank you for that. We need to take a quick break, and we'll return with Ciscoe Morris and some of his plans. And we're back with Ciscoe and a few items from his garden. Let's start with the hellebores here. Why do people love these so much here? They used to not be around here.
No, we call them Lenten roses. And in the old days, the first one were Easter roses, and those were really hard to grow. They had white flowers. And then we got Lenten roses, and some of the first ones, they were kind of interesting, but they weren't that fantastic. But now they're hybriding these like crazy. This is called Anna's Red. And this thing starts blooming in the first few days of January. It blooms for 3 months without stopping. It is one of the best plants I've ever met in my life.
Because it warms a winter gardener's heart, right?
It does warm the winter gardener's heart. And now you want to put this in kind of like, I would say, morning sun. You could put it out in your perennial border as long as it gets some protection from the hot afternoon sun in late summer. And even the foliage is fantastic on this plant. And these blooms just go on and on. It's a fantastic plant. But there is one thing. The minute you see new growth start, you go out around Christmas and look at the plant, and the leaves will be up. But you see new growth start, you cut all the old stuff off. And it'll look 100 times better if you do that. So that's a great plant. Anna's Red. That one, there's going to be a big run on Anna's Red.
What else did you bring? I'm interested in this, what's this, paper bush?
Yeah, so this is called Edgeworthia or paper bush.
I just bought one of those.
You know what's interesting? They make Japanese yen out of the bark of this tree right here. And you just got one.
I just got one.
Cool. It is so fragrant. I don't know if you folks could see it, but my socks just rolled up and down. Don't ever sniff one of these if you're wearing pantyhose. I don't know what could happen. So, and get this, Hummingbirds are hit. This is
It's all about the hummingbirds, always with the hummingbirds.
And I don't feed my hummingbirds in the winter because I travel, but the Anna hummingbird, the big green one, stays year round. If you have lots of things that bloom in winter, you don't have to put out a feeder even if you travel. They'll be there all winter long.
This is their salad.
Yeah, and
salad,
did you smell this? Oh my God. This is in the Daphne family, which, by the way, I brought Daphne.
Oh, I love Daphne.
Daphne odora.
I love
so
those.
this is such a wonderful plant. It kind of grabs your nose when you're walking by. Pulls you right back to the plant. The problem with this plant, they never live more than 20 years. They have to have really well-drained soil, and if you overwater them or anything, they'll die. And they always die on the day you have the most important visitors coming to see your garden. They do it just to be ornery. Hummingbirds love those too.
Oh, always with them.
Ciscoe, that was the first question I was going to have, was the Daphne. I have a friend who has a really, really old one. Half of it has died. She's worried, what should she do? Should she cut out the old dead part and see if it will still stay alive?
Once a Daphne goes downhill, you've lost it. So it's just a matter of time. She'd be better off digging that Daphne out, plant something different in that spot, because there's going to be all these pathogens that just attack Daphne, and plant something different, but go buy a new Daphne odora. I say put it by your door, because everyone that comes to ring your doorbell will just be swooning out there from the wonderful smell.
So that reminds me of Marianne Benetti, who always says, just dig it out and start over again.
Yeah.
From listening to her.
Sometimes it's not worth trying to save something, and a Daphne is one. Once they're on their way out, it doesn't matter if you planted it 2 days ago or 20 years ago. When it starts going downhill, there's never any saving them. So.
Thank you. One quick last question. So at the garden show this year, I purchased some red banana and elephant ear from that nursery in Oregon. I have been taking care of them in my living room along with the, I can't remember the one from Australia, the kangaroo paw. My husband is like killing me. He's like, get these plants out of the living room.
Not yet.
How soon can I put those outside?
Around Mother's Day, you could probably put those out. But even then, okay, if it's really cold out, stick them in the garage or something for the night and then bring them back out. But red bananas are fantastic. Awesome. I had one that I would put in my garage every year, and it ended up 20 feet tall, and I couldn't get it in the garage anymore, so I left it outside.
Thank you so much.
So Ciscoe, since you're here and I'm here, I wanted to tell you about this tree that fell during the big windstorm here a couple weeks ago. Western hemlock, about 35 feet tall, missed the living room by about 4 inches, hit the gutters and things like that. So Western hemlock, I looked it up. It's the state tree.
Yeah.
Should it be?
Well, it's a good question. I was a certified arborist for years, and I'd go to people's house and look at their trees, try and help save them, determine if they were okay. And the problem is hemlocks are healthy. They can be healthy as can be, but they go over in storms. They tend to,
they're out to
fall down easier than other trees. So I'd say if you have a big, big hemlock right behind your house, I might have an arborist come take a look at that. The problem is they may not know that it still could come down.
How do you tell, though? I mean, it was unclear how you tell.
You could usually tell if a tree is starting to have problems. That means they have root problems and their roots aren't really holding on that well. And also if they're in kind of cruddy soil, that's where they're likely to fall down. If they're growing on clay, you got a good chance that a big hemlock could come down in a storm.
And so it did.
Yeah. So Ciscoe, being a journalist and following what it is at sometimes the three-ring, circus of a news cycle, I found myself, in need of, going to a garden as a sense of therapy. Are there some public gardens that you would recommend to folks in Seattle that you?
That's a great question. Well, I think of there's a few really great public gardens. The Bellevue Botanical Garden. It's a fantastic garden with this big perennial border. And they have almost every kind of garden that you'd want to see, between a Japanese garden, a nature garden, a native plant garden, so that's wonderful. And there's a garden that used to be real famous a long time ago called Heronswood Garden. It was a nursery that sold the rarest of the rare plants. And I still have a lot of tags from that nursery with no plant with them. That's the way life is. But that one is really great, and it's open on Fridays and Saturdays in Kingston. I really recommend that. And then our wonderful Arboretum is fantastic. And I'll give one more, because I was the head gardener there for 24 years. Seattle University has a fantastic garden. And if you go there, it's really amazing. It's right in the middle of the city, but it's like an oasis in the middle of the city. It's quiet and kind of intimate, and you have your little protected spots. There's even a garden called the Ciscoe Morris Biodiversity Garden there. I'm the only person that ever didn't give money or die and has something named after him at universities.
That was a good one. Audience, again, join us if you would like, and then please come up to the microphone there. Show us what else you've brought
Okay,
here.
I'll show a few other, another plant that attracts hummingbirds. So this is a camellia, and it's called Yuletide, and it blooms right at Christmas every year, and I have it kind of spalliate against a fence. The hummingbirds are nuts for this. I went to a nursery because I wanted to show this on TV. And I go, "Do you got any Yuletide camellias?" It was right around Christmas. Guy goes, "Yeah, in the building around the side." 12 hummingbirds hitting the flowers in the building at Fernie's nursery. I couldn't believe it. But this has to be my favorite plant. Do any of you know what my very first TV show was? It was called Northwest Home and Garden. Jeff Probst from Survivor was the host of that show. Oh,
Wait a minute, can you get on Survivor? You can be on Survivor.
I wish I could get on Survivor, but I probably wouldn't survive very long if I did. I would know which plants to eat, maybe.
Yeah, I think you've got an edge there.
But they did
beat the other folks out.
They did a lot of specials at my garden because I had a lot of cool plants, and I'll never forget the first one. The producer said, "Describe some plants." It was the first show. I didn't know what to do. So I started describing plants. I got to the 5th plant, and the producer goes, "Stop!" I go, "What?" She goes, "You cannot say one more plant is your favorite. None. This is my favorite right here."
Well, this is what John Oliver said about you, too. You love everything.
I do. This is from Melbourne, Australia. And it is called Grevillea victoria. It's Victoria. It's named after Queen Victoria, and they call it the Royal Grevillea. I saw him 20 feet tall down in Melbourne when I was hiking. I come home, and a guy has this for sale in a nursery, and I said, "Well, it blooms in the middle of winter. It would never be hardy." He gave it to me. That was over 20 years ago.
Oh.
It's 6 feet tall, covered with these incredible red flowers that I hope you could see okay. And the hummingbirds, they bloom all winter long without fail, even in the worst cold snow. The hummingbirds just hit them again and again, and it's magnificent. Wow. I love this thing. Grevillea, you have to have one. The problem is that so often you can't find them. But I was at Malbec's one day, and they had 12 big ones. But I had like an entourage of people shopping with me.
So how many did you buy?
Well, I told everybody, "Oh, you got to get this plant, blah, blah, blah." I turned back around, and they're all gone.
So we have an audience question.
Hi.
Hi.
I hate to interrupt all these great plants, but I have just started my project. Today I put out a two-way soil. It's like half sand, half compost for overseeding my big kind of bank in front of my city yard. And I was wondering, I'm starting to worry that I covered up too much of the grass that was below. I did a really low fertilizer, I put that down first.
How deep did you put this?
I try to be I'm trying to also get out the bumps where I took out all the moss just a few weeks ago. And I put about 1.5 inches in some spots to a 1/2 inch, but there's not a lot of blades sticking through.
So it's over a lawn.
Yeah.
If you're going to It's a great thing to put like compost over a lawn. It's one of the best things you could do. It adds lots of great microorganisms and it'll hold more moisture. Never want to cover more than a third of the blade if you can help it. So hopefully a lot of those seeds you put on there are going to grow.
I actually haven't put the seed down because I think the temperatures are still too cold.
It's too
I'm
cold.
just worried about that
so
I cover too much blade.
I would go up there and thin that out.
Okay,
And then I think it'll be the best thing you ever did.
thank you.
So, what's your second or third favorite? Let's hear it.
Oh, I absolutely love this. This is called black mondo grass. And it's not grass. It's in the lily family. It's a very close relative to asparagus, of all things. Comes from Japan and China. And the grass stays, this grassy plant stays pitch black like this. So putting this in containers, think of these two planted together in a container. What a fantastic effect. And they cost an arm and a leg.
Oh, how much? How much is it?
This was like $15.
Oh, my.
And here's the thing. When you take this out of here, you're going to find little rhizomes that are on their way. They make a clump really fast. They're not aggressive. They don't take over your garden, but they make a clump really fast. You just cut off one of these little chunks, plant it in a new spot. You got a whole nother clump. This should cost 42 cents. But, and I do have to show this quick while I got a chance. This is coral bells or heuchera, and talk about a great plant for a container. And everybody asks me, do the hummingbirds like the flowers? Well, my wife and I used to have competitions who could do the best, like little mixed cut flower arrangements. And I made this big flower arrangement. I cut off these little sprays of flowers. The hummingbirds, there were 6 of us eating on a 44-inch table. The hummingbirds were coming between us, going to the flowers that I put in the bouquet from these coral bells. So the only problem was I was wearing a red sweater and one of the hummingbirds kept trying to stick its beak in my ear. But
other than that, I have time for...
Sorry.
All we have time for is a last audience question. Go
Okay,
ahead.
I'm wondering about privacy screen ideas for a small yard. We look over our alley and we love our alley. But it's there was a huge kind of green wall of hedge that had to be taken down. I'm just wondering what ideas you have that would...
I'll tell you my favorite plant for a privacy hedge, and it'll probably get 15 feet to 20 feet tall, and it's called Arbutus unado or strawberry tree. They get really cool strawberries. They attract 1 million squirrels. But other than that, and they're actually edible, so they're not poison. They're evergreen, red bark. And it takes sun or shade and drought tolerant as a rock. Strawberry tree. You'll love it.
Thank you. Thanks.
And thank you. We have been getting psyched for spring with Ciscoe Morris. We'll be back next month to discuss gun safety and catch up with Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal of Seattle. Thank you so much for watching. And thank you.
Oh la la.